Chapter 1. King Zhou and Goddess Nuwa. At one point in time as King Daji, of the newly established Shang Dynasty of China, walked through the royal gardens to gaze at the great beauty that laid before him, the flying cloud pavilion suddenly collapsed. As a single beam from the pavilion fell towards the king, Prince Zhou grabbed hold of the beam and threw it aside. After ministers such as Shan Rong and Mei Bo gazed at the strength that the prince possessed, they advised the king to name him crown prince. Thus, following the death of King Daji, Prince Zhou took the title of King Zhou and became the new ruler of the Shang Dynasty within its new capital Morningsong. After 7 years of prosperity within the Shang Dynasty, echoes of evil tyranny began to evolve in the heart of King Zhou. As the first rebellion thus took place on the 2nd month of the 7th year, Grand Old Master Wen Zhong, the head of civil affairs, went personally ride out upon his great dragon to subdue them at the North Sea district. In the following day, the Prime Minister Shang Rong asked the king to head to the temple of Nuwa in order to offer their condolences on her birthday. Following the latter's consent, the king and his entourage thus marched from the capital's gates to the temple of Nuwa. As King Zhou enjoyed the palace's immense scenery after his arrival, he gazed into the eyes of Goddess Nuwa, who sat behind a celestial curtain. Overtaken by her unparalleled beauty, King Zhou used his ink brush to write a poem of her valor upon a neighboring pillar within the temple. Even after being reproached by Shang Rong for what disaster the poem could bring about, the latter simply brushed him aside, saying that it was nothing more than a literary representation of her beauty. After the king and his entourage had returned to the capital, Nuwa noticed the poem and immediately vowed to end the Shang Dynasty due to the former's vile desires. Once she had arrived at Morningsong atop her phoenix, Nuwa realized that King Zhou still possessed another 20 years of reign and would thus live with lustful rage. As she arrived at her temple, she summoned forth her 3 right-hand sprites, Daji, the 1,000-year-old female fox, Splendor, the 9-headed female pheasant, and Jade, the female lute. Thus, following their summoning, Goddess Nuwa told them to transform themselves into beautiful women in order to distract King Zhou from his state affairs so that he would be overthrown in a further justified manner. Back in Morningsong, King Zhou seated in great depression over the incredible unattainable beauty that Nuwa had possessed and thus wished to not perform any action until he could attain her as one of his lovers. After effectively calling Minister Fei Zhong to his presence, he suggested to the king that 100 women should be taken from each of the 4 Grand Dukes so that he might have an opportunity to find a woman that ranked in beauty with Nuwa. With immense delight at such a grand opportunity, King Zhou rested for the night and would make his preparations in the following day. Chapter 2. The Rebellion of Xu Zhonglin. The next morning, King Zhou prepared 1 letter for each of the 4 Grand Dukes stating that 100 virgin women that possess at least a moderate level of physical beauty should be presented before the capital as soon as possible. As Prime Minister Shang Rong reminded the king that such an action would only bring out mass contempt in future rebellion, King Zhou sought his reasoning and withdraw the edict immediately. When the 800 marquises had appeared to offer their allegiance to the Shang Dynasty the following summer, Fei Zhong and Yuhun became extremely influential in court due to the leave of Grand Old Master, and thus asked for many presents and additional bribes from the former wealthy classmen. However, Xu Zhonglin, Marquis of Jizhou, refuted such compliances due to his fiery resolve to stand against such injustices fully. Due to such, Fei Zhong and Yuhun grew rather hateful towards Xu Zhonglin throughout the future. As the nation's marquises and dukes had arrived at capital Morningsong to display their Obeisance at the end of the year, the 4 Grand Dukes would be specifically placed before King Zhou and fully honored for great diligence in their duty. After the 4 dukes had been well feasted throughout the day, King Zhou returned to his inner chambers and discussed the current situation with his 2 favorite ministers Fei Zhong and Yu Hun, in a chance to force Su Hu to repent for his defiance. Fei Zhong declared to the king that the former possessed an exceedingly beautiful daughter that must be attained if the latter's ministers were to continue to trust his decision-making. After Su Hu had thus been summoned to the Dragon Virtue Court, King Zhou told the latter that if he was to attain his daughter, Su Hu would be granted great wealth, rank, and recognition within the dynasty of Shang. As Su Hu declined with many words of insult towards the king's lack of virtue, King Zhou became rageful and ordered Su Hu to be arrested. However, Fei Zhong advised the king that if he allowed Su Hu to return to Jizhou out of consideration and personal dignity, the people of Shan would look upon the king as a worthy ruler that listens keenly to his people's desires. In such a way, Su Hu's daughter could also be more easily attained. Now settling down to an extent, King Zhou ordered Su Hu to be expelled from the court. As Su Hu thus returned to Jizhou, he considered his choices. If he was to give his daughter to King Zhou, ministers of the court would think of him as slanderous and immoral. If he refused to hand over his daughter, the king would most likely attack his prefecture with an army in order to ensure that his defiance could not spread further. Carefully analyzing this, he decided it best to gather his own forces to fight Shang while he wrote a poem that represented hatred towards the Shang Dynasty upon the Meridian Gate inside the capital morning song. After King Zhou had taken notice of this immensely defiant poem, he ordered a force of 6 armies to be placed under his command during the newly established attack upon Jizhou. As General Lu Xiong elaborated his suggestions to the king, it was decided that Grand Duke of the North, Chong Hou, and Ji Chang, Grand Duke of the West, would lead a joint force against Su Hu's city instead. At the Capital Hall, where the Grand Dukes and other high-ranking officials were present, Ji Chang ordered an investigation as to why a loyal subject such as Su Hu would be deserving of punishment, while Chong Hou unconditionally accepted the king's words and headed out immediately with his army. Once Su Hu had attained word of Chong Hou's movement towards his territory, the former ordered his soldiers to be well drilled to defend the city walls against the king's army. As Chong Hou's army of 50,000 strong soldiers arrived before Jizhou, Su Hu grinded his teeth in frustration after hearing from an intelligence officer that Chong Hou was the enemy commander due to his one-sided reasoning. Amidst the roar of cannons, Su Hu presented himself before Chong Hou and elaborated the rationale behind his defiance. Chong Hou became enraged at his words, and sent forth General Mei Wu to dispose of the former in a quick manner. Su Chuanzhong, the eldest son of Su Hu, intercepted Mei Wu, who was cut down by Chuanzhong after following 20 rounds of fierce battle. Now that Su Hu's son had won the first victory, an all-out melee was unleashed between both forces, resulting in Chong Hou's eventual retreat. As the Jizhou forces thus returned to the city, it was decided that a surprise attack should be ushered forth that night upon the latter's stockades as to deal a critical blow to Chong Hou's morale and attain potential assistance of other neighboring powers such as the Grand Dukes after they had heard of Jizhou's strength. Once such a tactic had been fully employed at dusk, Chong Hou fled to a newly established camp and drink his worries away at the thought of Ji Chang's future assistance. While his forces thus ignorantly slept for the night, Su Hu's forces charged forth with the furiousness of a tiger and slaughtered countless soldiers of Shang in mere moments. Now in a state of great fear for his life, Chong Hou Hu personally clashed his cutlass against the resolved Xu Hu until the former's generals ran to his assistance. As the Shang forces thus fled in majority, Xu Hu called off their pursuit after 20 li 3 of distance was traveled. While currently fleeing through the stars of night with his generals, Zhong, Hou Hu came to the conclusion that strict defense should be employed for the moment, while a messenger should be sent to Ji Chang in request for reinforcements. Unfortunately for Chang, however, Su Chuanzhong suddenly appeared before the light of the moon with his ambush party completely determined to put an end to the former's life. With his immense renown and resolve, Su Chuanzhong easily defeated 3 generals of Shang single-handedly with his great dragon glaive. 3 Chinese unit of distance, equal to about 0.6 kilometers, 0.4 mile. 4. A sword or a large curved blade fixed on the end of a pole, also, a light lance with a long sharp-pointed head. Hou Hu, who became exceedingly fearful over the former's skill, fled away immediately from the combat. In a state of distraction over his father's sudden choice, Zhongningbiao received a deep wound through his left arm from Su Chuanzhong's glaive and thus fled for his life in addition. As Xu Hu held conference the following day, Chuanzhong appeared before his father and elaborated his great victory in the previous night. With great joy, the former smiled in admiration at his son's prowess and thus made preparations for his next essential movement. Chapter 3. Daji enters the palace. As Hou Hu thus regrouped his remaining forces, he'd grieve at their many past losses and what was yet to unfold. After General Huan Yuanji stated to the commander that it was currently best to ask Ji Chang for reinforcements, Hou Hu resolutely refused lest the latter would be punished by the king for not already offering his promised assistance. Once word came out that a large military force was heading in their direction at an immense pace, Hou Hu realized that it was none other than his younger brother, the renowned Black Tiger, Chong Heihu, Marquis of Chaozhou. With a total of 23,000 soldiers, Chong Heihu declared assistance to his elder brother and thus left to Jizhou. As Xu Hu attained report on Black Tiger's arrival, he sat in utter frustration over the former's ability to use magic. Su Chuanzhong, however, expressed little fear towards Black Tiger's magic renown and thus left the city to do battle with the latter. Even though Black Tiger arrived to simply discuss the situation with his old friend Xu Hu, Su Chuanzhong insisted to do nothing more than clash blades with the former after hearing of his physical prowess. Once the former and latter had thus began their duel, Su Chuanzhong noticed a large gourd present on Black Tiger's back, but continued to lash his dragon glaive forward with one resolve in mind, which was Chong Heihu's capture. With little other choice, then Black Tiger opened his gourd, which signaled countless celestial eagles to swoop down and peck their beaks into Su's flesh while black smoke oozed from his gourd profusely. After hearing of his son's capture, Xu Hu flew into unparalleled frustration and thus concluded it best to kill himself by the sword after slaying his wife and daughter, lest they were to be killed once being taken prisoners following his defeat. With such a thought in mind, Xu Hu presented himself before his daughter, with sword in hand, utterly determined to preserve his honor until the very end. Just at this critical point in time, Black Tiger's second arrival was reported to Xu Hu, and the latter thus made defensive preparations for the pass immediately. Black Tiger, who only intended on consulting with Xu Hu, had no choice but to return to the Shang camp in frustration. Due to the former's continued obstinacy, the supply lines were secretly cut off at set intervals as to prevent Jizhou from attaining their needed provisions. Within this moment of besiegement, Zhanluan arrived and challenged Black Tiger with due determination. During their vigorous clash, Zhonglin became aware of the latter's large gourd atop his back and thus immediately deployed his own magical ability, which was the soul stealing beams from his nostrils. As Black Tiger was presented before Xu Hu following his capture, he became grateful at the former's courtesy and thus took the place of honor. Once Chong Hohu had attained word of his brother's condition, San Yisheng, supreme minister under Ji Chang, arrived and told the former that a letter of exhortation should be sent to Xu Hu stating that he was to give up his daughter on the condition that he reattains the title of Marquis of Jizhou, which would save the people from further suffering. Following Chong Hohu's consenting, San Yisheng appeared before Jizhou and handed Ji Chang's letter to Xu Hu immediately. Upon the reading of this letter, Xu Hu became instantly enlightened at the West Grand Duke's rationale and thus consented with great happiness and feasting. After asking San Yisheng to deliver his reply to Ji Chang with gifts of fine gold and satin, Xu Hu made preparations to personally escort his daughter to the capital's palace. Chapter 4. The Fox Sprite Murders Daji. As Xu Hu took leave from Jizhou, Black Tiger promised to the former that he would return his son immediately after arriving back at camp. With reciprocated dignity, both Xu Hu and Black Tiger headed their separate ways to mark their conflict's true conclusion. Once Black Tiger had arrived back at the Shang camp, he explained the resolution of Xu Hu and thoroughly reprimanded his elder brother for his disgraceful incompetence, vowing to never see him again. With Black Tiger now returning to Chaozhou, Chong Hohu felt immense shame and embarrassment at his former actions and thus returned to his dukedom. Immediately after filing a report to King Zhou, after Xu Hu met with his newly freed son, Su Chuanzhong, and explained to him about leadership over Jizhou while he was away, the former entered the inner palace to discuss the situation with his wife. The next morning, Xu Hu and his tearful-eyed daughter, Daji, headed out in a carriage with 3,000 soldiers and 500 officers to make quick pace to the capital. Following the passage of many days, Xu Hu and his entourage arrived at a courier station within Inzhou and stayed there for the night. However, there had been a rumor of an evil sprite that was lurking within this station for the past few years, and Xu Hu thus constantly exchanged moments of reading his book of military strategy to ensuring his daughter's safety throughout the night, never daring to sleep for a single moment. Suddenly, during the second watch at night, each candle flickered constantly throughout the halls and people screamed at the sight of a supposed ghost flying about. Immediately, with due vigor, Xu Hu grabbed his iron staff and rushed to Daji's rear hallroom, but his lamp suddenly burnt out, forcing him to order a new lamp with due haste. Upon the entering of his daughter's room, he would be overjoyed to hear that she was only recently awoken once her father rushed into her room. As Xu Hu thus returned to his room in relief at such a good omen that his daughter remained safe, little did he realize that the 1,000-year fox had already seized Daji's body once Xu Hu was busy attaining his secondary lamp. After several days following their setting out from Anzhou, Xu Hu and his entourage finally arrived at morning song and present themselves before Prince Yellow Flying Tiger. Once Xu Hu had thus stationed his troops outside the city while Daji remained in the golden reception house, Fei Zhong and Yu Han became angry at their lack of presence from the former following his arrival and thus successfully encouraged King Zhou to put him to death the following day. As the following day arrived, Xu Hu presented himself before the king in convicted robes, stating that he deserves death for his past defiance. With Shang Ron's immediate defense, Fei Zhong declared that if Xu Hu's daughter was indeed very beautiful, she would be taken in while the former was freed, but if she lacked eloquence, on the contrary, both of their heads should be displayed before the city's gates. As Daji thus bowed before the king with her full condolences, the latter could barely control his inner lust and amazement at her colossal beauty and elegance. After immediately pardoning Su Hu for his crimes and placing him back at his original rank, King Zhou took Daji's hand and headed back to the fairy longevity palace to fully enjoy his first night with her. With greatly displeased ministers, civil and military affairs were continuously ignored. Throughout the future, as King Zhou enjoyed great pleasure with Daji from time to time. By thus setting aside exceedingly urgent matters, it seemed as if the Shang Dynasty itself was rapidly sinking into chaos. Chapter 5. Cloud Dweller presents a pinewood sword. This was the first chapter in which true chaos began to spread within the Shang Dynasty because of the king's new treasured concubine, Daji. In reality, this girl named Daji was truly killed and possessed by a fox specter who plans on destroying the dynasty through New Wa's orders. When this chapter began, the man by the name of Cloud Dweller was currently searching around Tiger Peak for medicinal herbs. After this renowned dweller of the clouds realized that there had been a 1,000-year-old vixen in human form as Daji present within the kingdom, the dweller told his pupil to prepare for him a wooden sword, a sword that would sicken the vixen to death after a period of time. After officials such as the number 1 Grand Counselor Meibo had discussed the major issue of the kingdom with his fellow officials, it was soon decided that a large gong would be beaten and all officials of the kingdom would gather before the king as to show their dedication. After the annoyed King Zhou entered from his room to meet his boring officials, he was not in any mood to listen and only wished to return to his precious Daji. Both the Prime Minister and the Vice Prime Minister called out to their king, "Sire, our kingdom is in trouble. There are uncontrolled floods and droughts. The populace is suffering and restless. All the memoranda from the dukes have not been attended to. Your Majesty has not come for months to the morning assembly. Many urgent matters await your decision." The king would generally turn a deaf ear to his officials primarily out of his ignorance. After Cloud Dweller appears present before Zhou and engages in a long conversation, he departs and tells the king to hang his wooden sword over the door of the Longevity Palace. Thus, the chapter then ends following the departure of both the king and all of his officials. At the very end of this chapter, however, the sword burnt through Daji's orders. It was mysteriously making her deathly ill. Chapter 6. The Burning Pillar Torture. As the wooden sword was thus turned into ashes, Daji recovered in immediate pace, still secretly remaining at morning song in order to inspect the outcome of his wooden sword. Master of the Cloud sighed at his inability to change the Shang Dynasty's destined outcome and thus wrote a short poem upon the observatory wall within the market area so that all people could understand what future they were to experience. After thus returning to Mount Zhongnan, people noticed the poem immediately and attempted to decipher its meaning. With no true success, Grand Tutor Du Yuanxian appeared, read the poem with partitioned understanding, and returned to his personal quarters to make up a report on what future the dynasty would experience if this evil specter was not effectively eradicated. Upon the finishing of this report, Du Yuanxian gave it to Prime Minister Shang Rong so that it could be presented personally to the king. Once Shang Rong left to the royal palace to deliver it to King Zhou, he was admitted in with Yuanxian's report in hand. Reading the report fully, the king believed his words to be rather accurate but decided to have Daji's opinion on the issue. Daji told the King that the Taoist earlier was none other than a wicked sorcerer who spread rumors to put the dynasty into a frenzy, and Du Yuanxian was assisting this sorcerer with full intentions to ensure full unrest within the people and should thus be publicly executed. Shang Rong, however, immediately retorted, saying that if Du Yuanxian was to be executed, his loyalty would not only be seen as mere rubbish but many ministers would rise up in addition to uphold his innocence. King Zhou, who told Shang Rong that Yuanxian should be executed as to prevent further full unrest stories from coming about, immediately ordered royal guards to bound Du Yuanxian with thick ropes and chains. As the latter was thus dragged off to the palace gates, Supreme Minister Meibo stopped the executioners and immediately asked for an explanation from Prime Minister Shang Rong. After hearing the story fully, Meibo flew into a rage at Shang Rong's fear to uphold true justice within the dynasty and thus grabbed the latter's arm while charging into the Fairy Longevity Palace to talk with King Zhou. With uncontrolled anger, Meibo began to shout violently at the king for his ineptitude and thus was ordered to be executed immediately. Just before Meibo was to have his skull smashed, Daji told King Zhou to put the former in the jails for now, while a torture device known as the burning pillar was to be constructed as his destined punishment. While thus gazing at the king's atrocities and delusion, Shang Rong sincerely asked the king if he could faithfully retire from the dynasty, lest he was to make any further mistakes in his old age. Following the latter's consent, many ministers gathered at the Chongteng pavilion to see their old comrade on his way that evening, raising their cups to bid their old comrade farewell. Shang Rong wrote one final poem to express his inner grievance before taking leave with tearful eyes, ignoring his ministers for several more days. As usual, tyrant King Zhou obtained a report on the burning pillars' completed construction. After Daji had thoroughly inspected the pillar's design, she smiled with happiness and suggested to the king that tomorrow should be Meibo's day of punishment. The following day at the Grand Hall, Yellow Flying Tiger gazed at over 20 pillars being lit blood red and sat in confusion as to why such objects would be in royal grounds. With Meibo's entrance into the Grand Hall, King Zhou sat in laughter at what was to soon befall the former. Thus being stripped and chained fully against a burning pillar, a single deathly scream rang against the royal halls as Meibo's flesh and bones were turned to ashes. Now leaving the Grand Hall with his other comrades, Yellow Flying Tiger exclaimed his resolve to do whatever it takes to save the dynasty from it was supposedly destined downfall. With celebratory music and feasting resounding through the walls of King Zhou's inner chambers, Queen Zhang felt personal hatred over the newly heard burning pillar construction and thus ordered her attendants to prepare for her a carriage. Chapter 7. Fei Zhong plots to depose the queen. Following Queen Zhang's arrival at the Fairy Longevity Palace, she was approached by Daji with a single courteous bow before being escorted into the court. With the king thus fully enjoying the night by his queen's side, Daji began to dance with great eloquence and beauty. Not enjoying this stay by her husband's side, Queen Zhang reprimanded King Zhou for his continued delusion and thus left the personal chambers of the court. Being rather angry and depressed over the queen's sudden words, King Zhou asked his precious Daji if she could dance once more to his delight. Falling to the floor with tears in her eyes, Daji exclaimed her worry towards the kingdom if the queen reported her actions to other ministers and nobles, resulting in her own death. The king, now exceedingly angry, ensured to Daji that he would dispose of the queen shortly to ensure her safety. On the first day of the following month, Queen Zhang received congratulations from the royal concubines as a monthly custom. With Daji prostrating herself before the queen, she was thoroughly humiliated over the former's words before taking her own leave. For being rebuked by the queen so wrathfully in front of two other concubines, Daji discussed with Dunhuan, her maidservant, about how Queen Zhang should effectively be killed and replaced. As King Zhou and Daji enjoyed the scenery of the gardens the following day, Fei Zhong attained a report on Daji's lust to kill Queen Zhang and thus pondered through night and day to think of a method lest he was to be eventually killed for refusing her decree. Gazing outside his window, Fei Zhong noticed a tall, bulky man by the name of Zhang Huan of East Lu that had come to repay the former with due respect and gratitude for his past consideration. With a plan now formed in his mind upon the latter's arrival, Fei Zhong immediately told Zhang Huan what to do, while informing Daji in addition. After being told to attend state affairs the following day by Daji, King Zhou was suddenly attacked by a disguised Zhang Huan saying he should replace his own father as king for the sake of the Shang Dynasty's preservation. As Zhang lashed at the king with his dagger, he was brushed back immediately by royal guards and effectively captured. Once Fei Zhong volunteered to personally interrogate the captive on the issue upon the entering of the Grand Hall, he reported to King Zhou shortly that the latter was a general under the Eastern Grand Duke, Queen Zhang's father. This duke had been ordered by Queen Zhang to put the king to death so that he could take the throne, after thus appointing concubine Huang as chief justice for this case. King Zhou angrily charged back into the fairy longevity palace asking about the issue with countless ministers. Not attaining any true knowledge of such a complicated incident, King Zhou passed an oral decree via the court herald onto Queen Zhang stating that she was to appear at the West Palace for trial immediately. Following her arrival at the palace, Queen Jian pleaded her innocence personally to Lady Huang, as the former's words were accurately told to King Zhou himself. Daji came forth from the shadows stating that the queen was simply pushing her own blames upon others with additional falsehood. It was thus decided that if Queen Zhang didn't confess the truth about the matter, one of her eyes would be gouged out as punishment. Lady Huang, who immediately ran to the queen telling her to confess a false statement, simply gazed forth as a royal guard plucked one of the latter's eyes out after refusing the former's request with due resolve. King Zhou, who became fearful of an attack by the Eastern Grand Duke or great condemnation from his ministers, was told by Daji that Queen should most reassuringly tell the truth after having her hands burnt to ashes by a boiling brass dipper. As such an action was resentfully decreed by the king, Queen Zhang sternly refused once more to confess any such crime and thus lost her hands to the dipper in short time. Regaining her strength after watching such a cruel scene, Lady Huang informed the king about her continued reluctance. In the former's great worry, Daji suggested to the king that Queen Zhang should be brought together to be tried with the accused Zhang Huan. Chapter 8. Princes take flight. As Zhang Huan and Queen Zhang was thus placed before the West Palace together, the queen and Lady Huan wrathfully rebuked Huan for his evil treachery. At this same point in time, Crown Prince Yin Jiao and Yin Hong, who was playing chess, was immediately informed by Yang Rong of the current situation and thus ran to the Western Palace in quick pace to meet with their mother. Gazing at their mother laying forth in a large pool of blood, the queen stated her final words to the crown prince to attain revenge before uttering one last breath before death. In unparalleled bloodlust towards his mother's death, Yin Jiao grabbed his sword and sliced the neighboring Zhang Huan into two pieces after being informed of the latter's treachery. Once Yin Jiao had impulsively shouted his additional desire to kill Daji, Chao Tian and Chao Lei, dubbed as the Chao twins, immediately ran to the king at the Fairy Longevity Palace in fear and elaborated the crown prince's intentions. In resounding rage, King Zhou handed the Chao twins his dragon phoenix sword to personally put an end to both princes through decapitation. With the twins thus heading to the Eastern Palace, Lady Huang heard the king's newest decree and quickly told the two princes to take shelter with concubine Yang at the fragrant palace for a few days. As the princes thus arrived at concubine Yang's residence, Chao Tiang and Chao Lei arrived shortly for inspection but were barked away for their rude insolence. After the princes left to a greater area of safety, the grand hall with Yellow Flying Tiger, concubine Yang decided to hang herself lest she was to be found out at a later time that she sheltered the princes. At this same point in time, Lady Huang informed King Zhou of Queen Zhang's last saying before death, and the Chao twins were ordered to head to the Grand Hall after elaborating their past failure. The princes arrived shortly before the Grand Hall and was met by Yellow Flying Tiger and many other ministers who angrily vowed to see His Majesty after hearing the former's unfortunate story. Once Fong Bai and Fong Xian, dubbed as the Fong brothers, roared into the Grand Hall stating that King Zhou should be overthrown for his blatant tyranny. Yellow Flying Tiger and others stood silent in great frustration if such an action would truly be right. In justice's name, the two Fong brothers each grabbed hold of one prince and charged forth from the palace gates, stating boldly that they would escort the two princes to East Lu before raising their own army to uproot the evil tyrant. As each minister sat in astonishment at what had just taken place, Yellow Flying Tiger solely stood forth in admiration of the Fong brothers' exceeded loyalty. With the immediate arrival of the Chao twins, they were informed of the incident with the Fong brothers. Being in a difficult situation, the two headed to see King Zhou in quick pace. After ensuring Yellow Flying Tiger with this task, the former headed out alone atop his divine rainbow ox. Following his immediate arrival before the two princes in the wilderness, he pleaded for the two children to put an end to their own lives, for if he was to kill them himself, his conscience would never be the same, but if he was to refuse the king's order, he would receive death. After Prince Yellow Flying Tiger sat in frustration, he told Fong Bai to head to Zhang Huanshu at East Lu with the two princes, while Fong Xian was to see Yi Chongyu to encourage him to lead a two-directional force against the capital, with the former handing Fong Bai his jade pendant as an expense. He headed back to the capital to report his failure, to the minister's delight. Upon his report to King Zhou that evening, Daji suggested to the king that two generals should be sent immediately that night to pursue the two brothers with 3,000 soldiers in assistance. Once these two less generals, Yin and Lei, approached Yellow Flying Tiger that night, the latter ensured their supply of men and horses to be ready at the fifth watch the following morning, lest his plans were to be foiled. Being equipped with old and infirmed men the next morning as soldiers, the two generals simply sighed to themselves with the knowledge that they had no other choice but to continue traveling for the past 2 days with the young princes. The four individuals arrived at a fork in the road, one direction leading east and the other leading south. The Fong brothers decided it best that the two princes solely traveled either paths while they both traveled to the west, for the precious jade piece given by Yellow Flying Tiger might be a risky expense lest anyone in the future realized who it truly belonged to. Thus, telling the princes their resolution, they informed them that they would take refuge in any neighboring dukedom along the way and join their vanguard upon it was future advance to morning song. Following their tearful farewell, Yin Zhao declared that he would continue to head east until he met with his grandfather, and Yin Hong should head to the south. Once his grandfather was to begin his troop mobilization upon the capital. Yin Jiao promised to inform his younger brother of his route so that he could additionally join in the attack. Thus parting in their separate ways, Yin Hong arrived shortly at a small village and sat down to eat a meal after declaring to the cottagers that he was none other than the younger son of King Zhou. Following his immediate leave, once paying his obeisance, Yin Hong entered the temple of Emperor Xianyuan along his way and slept there for the night in comfort. While Yin Jiao meanwhile continued his journey towards East Lu, he found himself in front of a grand tutor's mansion as displayed from a board hanging from its gate. Being late into the night, the prince decided it best to rest at this mansion for now while he resumes early into the following morning. Knocking continuously without any answer, Yin Jiao decided to open the gates where he heard someone reciting over a poem. Walking closer and elaborating the reason upon his arrival, Yin Jiao entered the mansion and saw none other than former Prime Minister Shang Rong standing before him to his immense surprise. As Shang Rong sat down to listen to the prince's story, he stamped his foot in unparalleled rage and thus vowed to Yin Jiao that he would return to the capital with the former and directly petition his Majesty to abandon his course of action to save the kingdom. With Shang Rong thus forming his petition, Generals Yin and Lei meanwhile decided to split their forces into two, one have leaving the east and the other to the south after arriving at the original Trite Fork Road. Thus leaving their separate directions, they decided to meet at this specific fork road as an area of regroup after the prince's was captured. Chapter 9. The Prime Minister's Resolve. As General Lei continued to the south from day to night, the majority of his soldiers fell off their saddles in their tiredness, and a command for rest was thus ensued. With the intention to rest at a village for the night, a section of his soldiers roamed about through the pine forest to eventually find the temple of Xianyuan. Upon the entering of this temple, General Lei smiled in immense delight as he saw none other than Prince Yin Hong sleeping soundly before him. Awaking the prince, immediately, he allowed the former to personally use his horse on their travel back to the three-staked road. Meanwhile, after 2 days of travel, General Yin arrived at a small village by the name of Fengyun, where he noticed the residence of Shang Rong nearby. Upon his entering of this residence, it was decided that Yin Jiao would personally ride together with General Yin back to the capital while Shang Rong heads to the former location at a later time, lest Yin was to be accused of private dealings with Shang Rong in the future. As Generals Yin and Lei thus regrouped at the three-forked road in due happiness over their success, Yin Hong and Yin Jiao wept together for their unfortunate situation. Following their arrival back to the capital, Yellow Flying Tiger ground his teeth in explosive rage, declaring that he would personally slay Generals Yin and Lei with his sword before they ever were to be recognized for their one-sided merit, ordering all ministers to quickly gather before the palace gates in defense. For the two princes, Yin and Lei meanwhile attained a written report from King Zhou to put them both to death before the gates in quick pace. Seeing such a report, Supreme Minister Zhao Qi grabbed it from their hands and tore it to many pieces in his rage. Continuing in such a manner, Zhao Qi declared to every minister present to go to the Grand Hall and invite His Majesty to attend, for such was the perfect chance to admonish the simple-minded tyrant. With Yellow Flying Tiger's 4 right-hand generals protecting the princes with their lives, and ministers banging the bells and beating the drums to attain the king's attendance, King Zhou simply wrote a decree to put an end to the princes for their unfilial behavior while remaining in his fairy longevity palace. With the executioners thus pacing towards the two bound princes, Superior Man Pure Essence and Grand Completion meanwhile roamed about through the heavens in great boredom. As they thus appeared above Morning Song and saw the two princes ready for execution, a grand gust storm ran across the heavens, putting every official and soldier present in fear. With the sudden disappearance of Yin Hong and Yin Jiao following the end of the storm, this calamity brought great relief and joy in the hearts of each official, while King Zhou sat in wonder at such a happening. Now finally arriving at the capital of Morning Song, Shang Rong rose forth and heard the complete story of current happenings from Yellow Flying Tiger himself. In due resolve to be able to confront the emperors of Ur in high honor and loyalty, Shang Rong immediately ordered the beating of bells and drums to force the foul King Zhou into the grand hall. As the king thus arrived before his desk, Shang Rong kneeled forward and presented to the former his written report. Upon the reading of this report, King Zhou flew into great rage, immediately ordering Shang Rong to be beaten to death with the golden hammer. Yelling back at the king with words of duty and love towards his past services in the name of the Shang Dynasty, Shang Rong knocked away the guards and jumped headfirst into a stone pillar, effectively ending his life in a rather gruesome manner. As many ministers exchanged glances at such a horrific scene, King Zhou ordered for his body to be thrown into an empty field behind the capital, in an expression of his dignity towards the former. Chapter 10. The Discovery of Thunder-quaker. Seeing this tragedy in full form, Supreme Minister Zhao Qi additionally expressed his inner hate towards the king without a single ounce of fear. Upon being bound before a burning pillar as punishment, Zhao Qi became nothing more than ash to the wind in mere moments. Now returning to the fairy longevity palace in great satisfaction over his barbarity, King Zhou personally approached Daji, explained the past incident with Shang Rong, and discussed with her how to get rid of Jiang Huanshu as a threat to the capital. With no true thought-out resolution to such a problem, Daji called forth Fei Zhong for a suggestion. Fei Zhong stated that the 4 regional Grand Dukes should effectively be disposed of lest any ministers of Morning Song attempted to rise up in rebellion with any neighboring force. Jiang Huanshu would also be effectively destroyed as a threat to the capital if he was to join the other 3 Grand Dukes in execution. Following the king's immediate approval of Fei Zhong's suggestion, 4 royal messengers were personally sent to each Grand Duke, Jiang Huanshu, Yi Changyu, Ji Chang, and Chong Hou, in quick pace. As one of 4 messengers arrived before the western foothills, Ji Chang's domain, and presented it before Ji Chang himself, the latter offered fine silver and gold to the messenger before ensuring his departure to the capital at a later time. After appointing San Yisheng as commander of internal affairs, Ji Chang went to his son, Bo Kao, told him of his 7-year prisoner prophecy, and how he should take care of state affairs following his departure. Explaining the situation to many other ministers in attendance throughout the day, Ji Chang took his leave from the western foothills the following morning, with 50 attendants by his side. As his party arrived before Mount Yen, a sudden rainstorm appeared with giant waves rolling down from each neighboring mountaintop. It was as if an ocean was falling from the very heavens. After hearing a colossal thunderbolt shake the very earth, Ji Chang gave the order for his soldiers to find the star of a warrior, followed from the saying that a gifted warrior was born after the movement of lightning. Upon the finding of a small newborn child with eyes like that of stars, Ji Chang told his men to find a local family that could take the child in. However, Master of the Clouds personally presented himself shortly before Ji Chang, stating that he would graciously take the child, newly dubbed as Thunder-quaker 5, in as his own, and return him to the former once he had left Morning Song. As Ji Chang thus continued his journey, he arrived at Morning Song one day to be entertained in the company of the other 3 Grand Dukes at the Golden Reception. House 5, sometimes also called as Thunderbolt. As the night flew and the 4 Grand Dukes enjoyed their wine to the fullest, Yi Chongyu, the Grand Duke of the East, began to spout words of hatred at Chong Hou's actions in his drunken state. Being at a loss in judgment due to their state of mind, Chong Hou and Yi Chongyu began to physically attack each other before Ji Chang forcefully pulled the 2 apart and sent them to their respective rooms. At the second watch that night, Ji Chang heard someone present at the reception house mutter that the blood of the Grand Dukes would stain the market walls the following day, threatening to put every individual to death if the culprit did not show himself. The accused Yao Fu was thrown before Ji Chang's feet shortly as Yao Fu, who was a relative of a royal messenger, told Ji Chang and Jiang Wanchu of the unfortunate past within the kingdom. Jiang Wanchu fell to his feet in misery over his daughter's cruel death, while Ji Chang offered to create a petition in his behalf, vowing to personally see King Zhou over the death of his precious daughter. Jiang Wanchu declared to Ji Chang that he should form his own report on the case. Instead, when Fei Zhong learned of their arrival before the capital, he told King Zhou that he should ignore any report that was to be handed to him the following morning, and the dukes should be publicly executed without condition. As King Zhou arrived within the Grand Hall the following morning, he announced forth the 4 Grand Dukes immediately. When Jiang Wanchu handed his report to King Zhou and calmly accused the latter for his barbarity, the former's robes were removed to prepare for his immediate execution. However, the other 3 Grand Dukes rushed forth protesting Huanchu's innocence.